All right, Alexander, let's talk about what's going on in Ukraine. There are some updates on the ground that I'm sure we can get into. I think that the situation in Kharkiv is pretty much as we've been reporting it. That's the way it looks to me. Some sort of a pinning operation, a distraction. I think not really of any consequence. The real battle happening in Donbass, and there it looks like the Russian military is now starting to make, at least this is what it looks like, is now starting to make significant gains. We've got three, maybe four cauldrons that are cooking now instead of one big one, and it just doesn't look good for Zelensky. And we have the economic situation where we are seeing a shift now from gas and oil, which was what we were talking about last week, to something that I think has really got the collective West panicking in a big, big way, and that is food and wheat, because the collective West understands one thing, that maybe with oil and gas, maybe they could get away with pulling a fast one on the people and having them propagandized, and maybe they can skate by with rising prices for gas and electricity. Maybe that's what they were thinking. But when it comes to people going hungry, now you're starting to see them panic. They are panicking in a big, big way. We actually had a report from the Wall Street Journal that the Biden White House is even now considering lifting sanctions over, I was going to say Lefkoros, I was going to say to Greece, over Belarusia, because they need Lukashenko's help to get the wheat via railroad from Ukraine and with Russia's permission through Belarus and into Lithuania in Europe. I mean, they are panicking because they know when people go hungry, that's when revolutions and real regime change starts, and they are scared to death of what could be coming in September, October, which I believe is very obvious what's coming. Wheat for rubles, everybody. Wheat
Absolutely.
for rubles.
Absolutely. Right, now let's start. I mean, lots of things to unpack there, but let's begin quickly with the military position. I mean, on Kharkiv, you're absolutely right. The Ukrainians launched their great counteroffensive 2 weeks ago. It became the absolute saturation story in the Western media. What happened was the Russians pulled back. There was no real fighting. No major forces were committed by either side. It was intended possibly to persuade the Russians to transfer troops from the Donbass. The Russians didn't take the bait. They didn't transfer any troops from Donbass. The Ukrainians advanced. They're now running desperately short of troops in Donbass themselves. They've had to transfer troops from this area of Kharkiv to Donbass. And of course, what's happening now is that the Russians are taking back the villages that were captured or occupied by Ukraine during that great counteroffensive. It was all a distraction. It was all a media affair. There was no reality to it. The whole thing's gone into reverse. You won't find anybody in the Western media to say as much. I was reading a few days ago about how Ukraine had won the Battle of Kharkiv. Now that it's all going backwards, you don't find anybody talking about that. On Donbass, you are absolutely right. The pace of events is intensifying. It's clear that in northern Donbass, in Lugansk region, the Ukrainian lines have been broken. The key event was the fall of Popasnaya about a week ago, 10 days ago. And what we see is settlement after settlement, village after village, area after area fall rapidly now under Russian control. And we see that the Ukrainian forces in northern Donbass are now becoming divided up, broken up, and encircled in penny packets. And there's a whole cluster of them. There's the Severodonetsk, Lysychansk cauldron. There is Liman, where the troops there have all also been encircled, and there's a number of others. And it's difficult to get a clear sense of the totality of the forces involved, but it looks like we're talking about something like 20,000 people spread out amongst these various pockets, all of which are now surrounded with no hope of rescue. And the Russian defense minister now says Lugansk region will be cleared of Ukrainian troops soon. Of course, he doesn't, again, provide a timeline. So this great series of Ukrainian victories has now come to a juddering reality stop. And it seems this, I mean, I've been following some of the websites, some of the commentaries. Even in Ukraine, people are now starting to panic about this. There's increasing talk that recriminations between the high command, the military leadership in Kiev, and the political leadership. Of course, we can't confirm that, but there are the first signs of, well, let's even say panic. There's been talk about Ukraine going through dark times. Zelensky's talking about Donbass having been destroyed, and from the way he's talking, Severodonetsk is being shelled by the Russians for no real purpose. But anyway, it looks like a slow motion collapse in northern Donbass, leading to a further collapse in central and southern Donbass. I mean, the Battle of Donbass, I'm not saying it's over, but we're starting to see the route towards its end. So that's the military picture. Oil has been a fiasco. There's been no agreement on the embargo. Italy is actually stepping up oil imports from Russia. Not a reported story. They're now the biggest importer of Russian oil. There's a weird story in the Financial Times about why they're doing it. I think there's a very simple explanation. Italy's now buying the oil and it's transferring it to Germany. Oil for rubles, a disaster. Oil embargo, a disaster. Gas for rubles, everybody signed up to it. So those things have been a total, complete flop. Early this morning, the ruble was trading at 58 rubles to the dollar. Now, it's eased a little off. This is all about, gas purchases and things. But the trajectory now is steadily towards 150 rubles to the dollar. It could come within a few weeks. I'm not saying it's certainty, but again, that's the trajectory of travel. So suddenly we now understand, as you absolutely rightly say, we have a global food crisis. We have a huge global food crisis. Of course, it's not us in the West who's to blame. We haven't created this situation. The inflation that we launched has no part in it. The fact that, we slowed down imports of gas over the summer, last summer, and that we weren't converting gas into chemical fertilizer, that there's shortages of chemical fertilizer all over the place. Well, that's not something we talk about. We don't talk about the fact that we imposed those sanctions on Belaruskali, the big Belarusian producer of phosphates that are essential for fertilizer. We don't talk about any of that. We blame it all on Putin. We say that it's all part of the fact that Putin is now blockading Odessa. We don't provide any of the context. And as you absolutely rightly say, we're coming up with all sorts of desperate ideas. Railways, opening the railways through Belarus. But of course, sending freight, wheat through Belarus to the Baltic ports. I've been actually looking into this. The Baltic ports aren't really geared for this sort of trade. The way you'd have to ship the grain, the wheat, if it left Odessa, would have to be through St. Petersburg. I'm just mentioning this because that's the place where it would have to pass through. But anyway, put that aside. The fact that they're even talking about all of this, you're absolutely right. It's a crisis. The G7's been talking about it. Olaf Scholz has been calling Putin about it. They have been worrying and stressing about what to do. Die Welt has written that actually Russia has actually stepped up its wheat exports, but Nonetheless, we still blame them. India is short of food. Sri Lanka, it's a catastrophe. Food shortages are looming in Europe. I was talking weeks ago about the fact that sunflower oil and rapeseed oil have now disappeared from British supermarket shelves. That's now, by the way, extending to olive oil. The reason lighter olive oils are vanishing is because now that you can't get rapeseed oil and sunflower oil, people in Britain are having to use light olive oils, which is much more expensive, of course, for cooking oils in their place. So that's what's going on there. And you're absolutely right. The very last thing we want in the early spring, in the early autumn, is a rocketing up of food prices across the West, and not just, of course, the West, but the global world, and of course that on the eve of the midterms. But of course, if there's food shortages adding to all the other shortages, well, frankly, it's game over. I mean, you cannot get by without food. I mean, as you rightly said, governments fall, economic crisis happens. You have to, at that point, go to those who can supply the food. And if it's food for rubles, well, you might not like it, but you'll have to lump it. They're not yet at that point yet. They're still coming up with these desperate ploys. The railway lines through Belarus, the lifting of the sanctions on Belarus, the Harpoon missiles to Odessa, all of these things. I mean, can I just say? I mean, again, I'm not a military person, but I gather there's massive technological and problems about Harpoon missiles, and of course, what sending Harpoon missiles to Odessa is going to do is it's going to make this into an even denser war zone. Are you going to send freight ships through an even denser war zone? I mean, it doesn't really make very much sense to me. The one thing they have to do, the one thing they should, of course, do is sit down, negotiate, look for a diplomatic solution to the Ukraine problem, which could still be possible, though with every day that the war continues, that becomes less likely. And why would the Russians negotiate anyway if they're winning? And of course, on top of that, I mean, start thinking about your whole economic war of attrition. It's not going the way you thought.
Yeah, the one thing that they can do that they're going to have to do is they're going to have to surrender. I'm not talking Ukraine now. The EU, specifically the EU, is going to have to surrender. And they're going to have to admit that they lost. They won't be able to do it, but they should admit that they lost, because if they don't, then people in the EU and in Europe, including myself, we're going to go hungry.
Yeah.
We're going to go hungry because they have led us down an impossible path. And Putin has exposed their folly and their weakness. Even Medvedev said that, and I want to get this quote right. God, Medvedev he's on fire. He said that the West is to blame for everything because of its own cosmic cretinism for the looming crisis. They're to blame for the looming crisis. Cosmic cretinism. That is what Medvedev said on a Telegram post. I mean, they've led us down this path. And if they don't reverse gear, people are going to really suffer. And that's when they're going to get onto the streets.
Absolutely, you're completely right. That is exactly what's going to happen, and we're seeing this starting. The worry, the fear, starting to grow. And as you rightly say, I mean, the midterms in the US are going to be the least of our problems. If food runs out, if there are food shortages in Europe, and by the way, in Britain, because we're desperately exposed to this. We're going to discuss that in another program, but we're desperately exposed to this crisis, perhaps even more than Europe is in some respects. Then, as I said, we really need a way out, a diplomatic way out. We need to sit down. We need to do it now, and we need to start coming up with some realistic solutions to this problem, which don't involve Harpoon missiles and railway lines through Belarus, but actually involve addressing the actual problems. I have to say, there was this extraordinary telephone call between Scholz and Putin a few days ago, which I've already discussed in various programs, but there was a line of it in the German readout that really stood out for me, in which Scholz said that he reminded Putin of Russia's responsibility in global food supply. Now, that comes across to me very much as saying, Russia, just go on supplying us with your food. Go on supplying us with all the things we want, even as we go on piling on the sanctions upon you. Why would the Russians do that?
Medvedev said as much. I have to go back to Medvedev. And he said the same exact thing. And let me pull up the quote. One second, I'm going to pull up the quote because he said, actually, I think he said something along the lines, what are we, stupid? I mean, that's literally his quote. Because, and why should, if Russia does wheat for rubles, which they're going to do, they're not cutting off the West from their commodities and their resources, including food. They're just saying, if you want this food, much like we did with gas, you have to get it on our terms and under our full control. No more putting our money and our foreign reserves in your bank so they can get confiscated. You have to do it under our terms. So, Russia, on balance, has been pretty accommodating with regards to gas. And I think they're going to also be accommodating when it comes to food. It's just that the unfriendly nations, well, they're going to have to open up an account in Gazprom Bank, or I don't know, Sberbank, Gazprom Bank. They're going to have to open up a ruble account again, and you're going to have to go through the whole thing. Medvedev said that food for the citizens of Russia is a sacred matter. He also said, and let me get the sanctions interfere with everyone's desire to live a normal, prosperous life. He said the expansion of NATO and the mess with the calculations of debt payments and other things have aggravated the situation. And what interferes the most is the West's own cosmic cretinism. All these hellish sanctions are worthless when it comes to vital things such as food or energy. The West, they've got themselves to blame, he wrote. I mean, there's so much here. He said that the importing countries, the countries that would import, that are importing the food, would have a very difficult time without Russia's fertilizer and wheat, because without Russian fertilizer, only juicy weeds would grow on their fields. And he said, as far as okay, here's the line. He said, on the one hand, this is a direct quote, on the one hand, insane sanctions are being imposed on us. And on the other hand, the West is demanding food supplies. It will not happen. We're not idiots.
Yeah.
These are direct quotes.
Yeah.
This is what Medvedev wrote on his Telegram channel.
Yes.
It's incredible.
Well, of course it is. But why is anybody surprised? I mean, what kind of ludicrous sense of entitlement do we have in the West that we think we can impose sanctions on the Russians and that they will simply go on providing us with their oil, wheat and gas on our terms? I mean, it's just, cretinism describes it extremely well. Now, can I just also say, people complain about gas for rubles. There was an extraordinary comment by Tindemans, who is the vice president of the European Commission, complaining about the fact that nearly all the European gas companies are now opening ruble accounts. I mean, he's saying, this is terrible. Why is this happening? What are we? What has become of us? Why are they doing this to us? Well, the reason they're doing this is because we need gas, we need food, we need oil, we need all of these things. I mean, what did they think would happen? Well, I could tell you what they thought that would happen. They thought when they imposed those shock and awe sanctions back in February, Russia would just collapse like a house of cards because it was, had an economy, a one-dimensional economy, the size of the Galapagos Islands or whatever it is that they always say. And it hasn't turned out like that. Now, I was looking at the latest figures in Russia. I mentioned the ruble having, gone below 60 rubles to the dollar this morning. I was also looking at the inflation numbers, and inflation in Russia was below the aggregate, the accumulated rise in prices in April was below 2%. Now that would translate to, a steep fall in inflation from the double-digit figures in March. The indications are that in May it's going to fall even further, and Putin was talking about inflation having stabilized at normal levels. It's not impossible. We could see some degree of deflation in Russia in the summer, especially with food and energy prices, that the costs will fall. Some commodities will remain more expensive, but it's highly likely now that the inflation figures in Russia will not be, will just, for the whole year, will just be in double figures. They will not be anywhere near the levels that some people were thinking, even as, of course, prices in the West are shooting up. People didn't understand. We've been saying this on many programs on this channel, going back years. People didn't understand the diversity, sophistication of the Russian economy. And at the same time, as I said, they have this bizarre notion, this extraordinary sense of entitlement that, we can sanction the Russians as much as we want, and they'll just go on accepting it, and we'll just go on providing us with all the things we need until we no longer need it. And I mean, cretinism just doesn't convey the full apocalyptic sense of it. I agree with you, by the way. I agree with the point you made. I think that the military outcome in Ukraine will be decided conclusively in Russia's favor over the next few weeks and months by the early autumn. And by the early autumn, the EU will have no real option but to cave, except, of course, it's difficult to see how they can, but look forward to seeing governments across the EU starting to fall.
Who's going to get fired because of this incompetence? That's a
Well,
serious
Olaf-
question.
Yeah, Olaf Scholz.
And also a bit of a not serious question, but who's going to get fired because of this?
Yeah, Olaf Scholz, I think, is probably a dead man walking, to be straightforward about this. I mean, election results in Germany have been very bad for the SPD. The CDU-CSU is rising. The Greens, believe it or not, are also rising because, of course, they're getting all the support of all those people who want to take an anti-Russian line at the moment. But I doubt that that is going to be sustained for very long. But Olaf Scholz and his government are surely going to unravel. And I personally would not be surprised if, when the full implications of what the Greens have been up to hit home in the autumn, we see the support implode there too. In Italy, Salvini, the sleeping volcano, has now come out and has been making certain comments about how the sanctions policy is turning out wrong, and we need to go into reverse gear, and we need a negotiated solution. Now, remember, Salvini is a major prop of Draghi's government. So without Salvini's backing, it's difficult to see how this government in Italy, this technocratic government, can continue for very much longer. And there's due to be elections at some point. The brothers look likely they're going to sweep the board in Italy. Well, we'll see. But anyway, things are beginning to look increasingly brittle there. The big question is what happens to the EU Commission leadership, to the ghastly trinity of Ursula von der Leyen, Borrell and Michel. Will they go? Will they stay? If this all implodes, even I can't see how they can stay.
They need to go.
No.
Without question. Not that the
Without
next people are going to be any better, but
I know. At least
I
they
don't, I
were.
don't see how you can be any worse.
No, well, one, you can't be any worse, and of course, they won't have been compromised to the extent that this, as I said, this hideous trinity have been. So, I mean, they could at least start with a clean slate, which of course Ursula cannot do. I mean, I cannot honestly see how Borrell can pick up the phone to Lavrov now, or Ursula could pick up the phone to Putin now. I mean, I just can't see how it can be done, or how they can support a change of course.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave it there. The Duran. Yeah.
I mean, all I
Something
was
else to add?
I just wanted to say, of course, if this happens, I mean, this would be a geopolitical earthquake. I mean, make absolutely no mistake. I mean, we're not there yet. But if things turn out this way, then, I mean, the world that we have known has changed, and changed in the most fundamental ways. The West, the collective West, will have been forced into a corner and forced to back down. Now, this would be far bigger than Iraq or any other of the debacles we've had. It would be the end of the post-Cold War era.
Well, the world has already changed real quick. China is signaling that they want the BRICS to expand. Latin America and Africa. They want to look at Argentina. They want to look at countries in Latin America and Africa to join the BRICS or to be associated with the BRICS. China is working with Russia on a diplomatic, on a political level, to increase their petroleum reserves. You know, you're seeing these two countries work together to provide each other with economic and energy security.
Yes.
India continues to buy oil. They've bought so much oil that a refinery that was scheduled for maintenance, they had to actually delay it in order to refine all the oil that they're getting.
Yeah.
I mean, we're already seeing it happen. It's already happening. I'm not saying we're at a checkmate moment, but we're fast approaching it.
We are fast approaching it.
And maybe we're there. I don't know.
Russian oil production, by the way, is rising. I mean, it was supposed to collapse. I mean, it's now going up. But anyway, that's another story. But I mean, and in Latin America, elections in Colombia apparently coming. New government there, less pro-Biden, more willing to look at other things. Perhaps, you know, and Colombia has, of course, been a major prop of the US order in Latin America, and of course, possibility that Lula might win in Brazil, and of course, he was a whatever else
talking about lifting sanctions on Maduro.
Or exactly. I mean, you know, but make no mistake, if the Russians are able to bend the EU to its will, I mean, it's the collective West is shattered. I mean, that would be a geopolitical earthquake. Everything else that we see is important, but that would signal to the world that it has really changed. Things have really changed. Anyway, we're not at that checkmate moment. Who knows?
We're not there.
They'll try, no doubt, to find some way out. But you know, keep an eye on this one.
I don't know. It's either that or World War III, like real World War III.
Well, absolutely.
I mean, I don't. I'm trying to figure out: is there a middle ground?
No.
Maybe.
Well, I mean,
who knows?
Well, the Harpoon missile madness is a step in that direction as well. But let's hope we don't get there. Let's hope that sanity prevails. But we've had not very much of that up till now. So let's see what happens.
All right. We'll leave it there, everybody. The Duran.locals.com. Use the code GOODDAY. Get 10% off all merchandise from our shop. Take care.